the Soul Map series, which is delving into exploring and discovering the book known as the Tanya, written by the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad leader. And we have been talking about how every single person is able to, at least on the outside, in an external way, control our behaviors, what we do, what we say, and even what we think, even though obviously thought is more difficult than action. And we described that quite at length in the past 2 classes, I would say, how this impulse control, even if within we may be having a struggle, we may be having some kind of conflict, we could still act properly on the outside, even if it doesn't exactly sync with the way we feel inside. And we described how the Tanya focuses on a specific personality or persona known as the Beinoni. Okay, the Beinoni means the regular, average individual, and this kind of person will be able to exercise this sort of self-control or self-mastery in his or her outer garments, as the Kabbalistic term goes, which again are those 3 capacities of thought, speech, and action. So we made it sound a bit simple and within reach and easy, but really, obviously, I think most of us, if we would have stopped to think about this for a moment, how long realistically could each one of us actually maintain that absolute self-control that the Alter Rebbe describes that a Beinoni is capable of? That even though within us we have forces of holiness and forces of negativity, in these 3 capacities of thought, speech, and action, we are perfectly good all the time without fail. So, like any new project, any new goal or endeavor, which we start with enthusiasm, with excitement, we'd start with a lot of energy and we would be quite successful. But as time would go on, the strain would start to be felt. And I'm going to give you an illustration to help us understand this a little bit further. So imagine you have an elastic band, a rubber band, okay? Now on one side of the rubber band are the feelings that you have within you. And the other side of the rubber band is the actions, the deeds, or the speech, the way that you act, that you behave, whether or not that coincides with how you feel. So if you have the rubber band and it's slack, it's loose, the thoughts, the actions, the behaviors, and the feelings are basically in sync, that the rubber band is sort of relaxed and comfortable. Now let's imagine we start to push ourselves a bit out of our comfort zone, okay? We want to upgrade the way that we're behaving in a certain area. Inside, we don't really feel up to that point yet, but we feel like at least on the outside, we'd like to improve a certain standard. So we start pulling forward that behavior side of the rubber band. But the feelings are not there yet. So the feelings stay here and the behaviors start to move forward. So first the stretch is a little bit of a stretch. Then there's more of a stretch and more of a stretch. And if we do nothing to help our feelings catch up with our behaviors, the strain starts to become quite intense and quite difficult. And of course, if we want to be able to realistically maintain this increased standard of behavior, we cannot just leave our feelings as they are. Because if we do leave the feelings as they are, then one option would be is that the behaviors just fall to the wayside, and the elastic band just springs right back to where it used to be in its comfortable comfort zone, quite close to the feelings. But if we've decided that the behavior that we are pursuing is worth the effort, then obviously we'd much rather help our feelings catch up to our behaviors. So while it is much more of a challenge to transform and refine how we are inside of ourselves, it's nevertheless possible to bring our insides closer to those behaviors and help us keep the motivation to reach to a higher standard of goals or aspirations. So how do we do this? How do we bring the inner capacities, the inner faculties that we have, which are largely the way that we've been born and what God has bequeathed to us? They're part of our internal makeup, who we are. How do we bring that in sync with the way that we would like to behave? So last week we described a few different personalities in order to give us a context for where the Bainani falls. And one of the types of people we described was the tzaddik, the completely total righteous individual. Now, truthfully, only a tzaddik can absolutely perfect their insides, their essence. Because a tzaddik is of a different order. And a tzaddik doesn't have the struggles of good and evil. As a Bainani, we will not be able to perfectly transform what's going on inside of us. And that is absolutely fine. It's not necessarily within what is demanded or required of us. However, we can help our insides catch up enough so that they can help continue our motivation to be better people and to do more than we've done previously. So, to say in very short, in the previous classes, we've spoken about the importance and the ability that we all have to do the right thing, even if we don't feel so much like it. And today we're going to talk about how we can actually make ourselves feel like it more often. So I'd like to ask each of you who are listening to think for a moment about something that you do just because you have to. You don't particularly enjoy it. Perhaps you don't enjoy it at all, but you know that you cannot get away with not doing it. It could be that you have more than one of these things in your life, but just think of one thing in your head. So I'll give you some examples. Perhaps filing taxes. Perhaps you don't like recycling. Perhaps it's a bother for you to schedule regular care at your dentist. You don't enjoy the experience and therefore you'd rather not have to go. So these are some examples. I'm sure you have some examples of your own in your head. And when we have these kind of chores or tasks that we know we must take care of, we can push it off, but there's going to come a point where we're going to just have to take care of it. Otherwise, we're going to face consequences that we don't want to have to deal with. So one of the ways to help us get through something that we don't want to do is to try and make that task slightly more appealing, more enjoyable, or to give it a certain meaning and purpose. And then you have much more of a motivation to get to it faster. So let's say, for example, we'll take the example of recycling, okay? So perhaps at first when you started to have to recycle, all these bottles and boxes, they were taking up so much space on your counter, and it was just really, you were finding it quite irritating till the day it came when you could actually put it out so that it would be picked up. But now, after you've been doing it for some weeks, some months, you realize, well, because I'm doing all this recycling, I actually don't have as much garbage as I used to. And that's really nice. And it's also really nice that I'm helping the environment. I mean, I'm not tossing everything into the landfill. Some of this is actually going to be able to be reused. So you start to feel more positively about this particular thing that you have to do. And you don't look at it so much as an annoyance, as a pain, as something to push off, or something to do as little as you can of. So obviously, if you like what you're doing, it's much easier to stick to the commitment of doing it. And it also makes the actual activity a whole lot more meaningful. You're not just waiting for it to be over. You're doing it with intent, you're doing it with purpose, you feel like you're getting something out of it, you feel like you're getting to a certain goal. So how do we do this with our inner feelings, with our emotions, when we know that there's something that we should be doing that would make us into better people, whether it's something we feel on our own or something we know that God would like us to do, or something we know that as a Jew, this is important and we should really be doing it. But it's not always something that necessarily comes naturally or easily to us. So how can we help ourselves feel more inclined, more motivated to do some of these things? So in the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe actually gives us two paths to bringing our emotions or our insides more in line with a better standard of behavior. And these are called the long, short way and the short, long way. Okay? I know that sounds confusing. We have the long, short way and the short, long way. Derech in the Hebrew, derech aruka or tzara, and derech tzara v'aruka. Now, interestingly enough, the Tanya, when it describes the longer way, it actually takes 2 chapters to explain how to do the long way. But when it gets to describing the short way, the Tanya actually devotes 8 entire chapters to explaining the shorter way, which seems a bit contradictory and counterintuitive. The reason for this is because the long way is pretty straightforward and simple to understand, but to implement it takes a lot of effort, can take a long time, many years. The shorter way, it's more of a complex concept for us to understand, but once we understand it, we can start to implement it much faster and to see more immediate results. We're going to talk later why we would need both of these ways and why can't we just suffice with one of them. So we're going to start with the longer way. Okay, we have, I know I introduced each of them with a double-barreled name, but just for simplicity, we're going to talk about the longer way and the short way. So the long way, to create new feelings inside of ourselves. Okay, creating new motivations, new desires that didn't exist in us before. We do that through contemplation. What does this mean? When we think to ourselves on our own for an extended period of time, we think deeply about a topic or about an idea, it helps to create feelings or to build feelings about that specific subject. It makes us care a whole lot more deeply about that kind of subject. So when we're talking about bringing ourselves to feel more strongly, that we would like to do a specific mitzvah that God commanded of us, which until now has felt like a struggle and has felt a bit out of our reach. We spend time thinking about God, thinking about him as the creator of the world, the one who created us, the one who is actually within each and every one of us, as we described in our first class. Thinking deeply about these ideas gives us more of a feeling for God, and we care more deeply about what God cares about. Let me give you an analogy to help understand this a little bit further. So there's a particular resident of a particular town, and the town has a local sports team. Now, this individual knows absolutely nothing about the sports team. Not the names of the players, not what their record is, nothing. So by consequence, this individual doesn't care if the team wins or loses. Now imagine one day he picks up a newspaper and he starts to read the sports page. And he starts to learn things about the team, the players' names, where they come from, their achievements, the games that the team has played, what they've won, what they've lost. And every week he's reading the sports column. And as time passes, he's obviously learning much more about the details and the particulars of the team, how it works, where their talent is, and if they're winning or losing. And without even realizing it, as the time passes, he will start to develop feelings for whether or not the team wins or loses. If he hears that they win a game or that they lose a game, he's going to start to care about it because it's something that he's become invested in, involved in. The knowledge has seeped into him and made him have feelings for and care about what happens with the team. So let's see if we can look at the words of the Alter Rebbe to explain how this can teach us about the way that we think about God. So I'm going to see, I'd like to share my screen with you over here. Hopefully we can pull up, the Tanya. So we have the Likutei Amarim, and we're going to be looking in chapter 16. So let's find chapter 16. Okay, so this then is the important principle regarding the divine service of the Beinoni. The essential thing is to govern and rule the nature that is in the left part of the heart, by means of the divine light that illuminates the divine soul abiding in the brain, and to rule the desires of the heart. So just to get a little bit technical, when we talk about the souls, we talk about the godly soul, we talk about the natural, selfish, animal soul. So the godly soul rests primarily in the brain, and from there it spreads to the rest of the body. And the animal soul, the instincts, the desires that we have is said to reside in the heart and in the left side of the heart. Okay, so the Beinoni, in his or her divine service, is trying to maintain this position where the brain or the godly soul is governing and channeling the feelings, the desires of the animal soul that are found in the heart, okay? And to rule the desires of the heart, that the godly soul should lead the animal soul rather than the animal soul leading the godly soul. So how does one do this? So we're going to read the translation over here. This mastery of one's nature and desires is achieved when he meditates in his mind on the greatness of the blessed infinite God, so as to create through his understanding a spirit of knowledge and fear of God in his mind. So the more a person thinks about the greatness of God and the kindness of God, this knowledge, as it starts to percolate in his mind and in his consciousness, it develops a person feeling in awe of God, let's say. You know, if we imagine, if we start to think about the myriads of creations that exist and the complexity of each one of these beings. I mean, we could start by even just taking one particular creature and studying it, and then recognizing the complexity of that particular creature, and then extending that to all the other things that exist that we are too numerous even to count. So to imagine that God is the one that brought that all into existence. This knowledge and fear, we're in the second paragraph over here, will cause him to turn away from the evil condemned by the Torah or by our sages, even from a minor rabbinic prohibition, heaven forbid. Okay, so that's obviously on the side where we're turning away from doing something negative. But there's a twofold effect, because as you see over here, contemplation on God's greatness will bring about also a love of God, all the beauty and all the blessings and all the perfection and harmony in nature. These are just some examples of things we can think about, but obviously there are others. They bring about also a love of God, which will reveal itself in the right part of the heart, the seat of the godly soul's emotional faculties. And when a person starts to feel love, which means feeling drawn towards God, feeling God's importance in his or her life, that creates a longing and a desire to cleave to him by fulfilling the precepts of the Torah and of the rabbis and the study of Torah. So when God commands us in the Torah that we're supposed to love God, right? V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha. We're supposed to love the Lord our God. Now, obviously, if somebody tells you to love somebody, that doesn't automatically produce feelings of love in you for that person. So how do you come to love or care for somebody? The more you know them, the more you come to understand them, the more you come to feel what's important for them. And it starts to become important to you. So in order for us to develop any sort of feelings towards God, we need to learn, and it's not like getting to know an individual whom we can interact with and spend time with. So we need to study about him. We need to learn about him. And the more we do so, the more it will start to matter to us what God wants. Because God will start to feel more personal and more part of our lives. Just like this particular individual, the more he studied and learned and read and understood about the local sports team, the more he started to care about it. Now, when we read in the Tanya where it describes a fear of God or a love of God, so these emotions can sound very intense. And of course, they can be very intense. There are people who can truly feel quite fearful, or especially in the case of a tzaddik, feel extremely passionate love towards God. Now, this is not necessarily required of the Beinoni. In order to develop feelings for God, it's enough that we feel an appreciation for who God is, what God does, enough that we feel an understanding, and we realize the importance of following his word. It doesn't have to be this overwhelmingly passionate love if that's not something that we feel that we are able to reach. What we're trying to get to is to a point where we start to feel like God wants this, so therefore it must be important, and I feel that it really is important, and I should try to the best of my ability to move in the direction of fulfilling that particular thing that God wants. So it's okay, and it's perfectly considered within the realm of being a Beinoni if we do not become transformed into these completely spiritual beings which are suffused and full of emotions and passions for God. That's not necessarily what we're looking for. That's more in the realm of a tzaddik. It's just about starting to feel more tangibly that what God wants is important for me to do something about it. Okay, and the Alter Rebbe actually describes these feelings as love which remains hidden in the heart. Okay, so there's a motivation there, there's a feeling, there's an appreciation there, but it's hidden. It's not this overwhelming, passionate yearning or desire. So I'm going to ask you to think about something else now. Is there a particular topic or behavior or lifestyle change or something like that in the past you didn't really used to care about at all, but today you care very much about, to the point that you even do things differently than you used to do? Okay, so just to repeat that, something that you didn't used to care about or you didn't used to feel was important at all, but now you feel like it's a very important topic, which possibly has also caused you to change the way that you behave. I'm not talking about necessarily something that only has become relevant later in life, something that could have been relevant earlier in your life, but you didn't used to care about. So what could have brought about a change in a person where they used to feel they didn't pay any attention to this matter at all, and now suddenly they are paying attention to this matter and they feel like it's extremely